So initially we may ask, wait, Uncle Bob burns down the backyard on July 4th. What's this all about? Well, about our Constitution. And believe it or not, we have schools throughout our community, throughout Montcalm County and some in Ionia too. So we're all going to be on our best behavior, okay? Believe it or not, our Constitution, this is a required law. Now we immediately say, oh, if the government's requiring it, it can't possibly be good. But in this case, we have to admit a little bit. Folks in government saw, as you can see, some time ago, that there were a great number of Americans who were a little bit unclear about what the Constitution is, what it provides, why we have it as opposed to something else. So believe it or not, this is an official holiday. And please take note, literally on the same day. We don't wait till Monday, September 17th. This is the day I set off fireworks. And I get in trouble because nobody else is doing it, right? I know I'm a little bit weird. And it's been more formalized recently, not just to recognize the Constitution, but those folks who are new citizens fought the bureaucratic process to make that happen. Okay? That's why we're here. What is it? Well, if you were to go to Washington, D.C., our National Archives, Hollywood's portrayed a little bit of this in a really cool movie. There it is. I hope the ink stops fading. We need this document. We revere it for so many different reasons, and we all have our own thoughts and ideas about how important this is. I talked to a couple of our elected officials just earlier today. They really wanted to be with us right now, but urgent business in Lansing required us to sit down a little bit earlier. So let's see what they had to say about the Constitution and what it means to them. How you talk a little bit about what that's like and how your daily work down in Lansing and here in the district is informed by that. It must not occur often, but it has to strike you at times, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm reminded of that oath every day within my duties as state representative. Everything that we do, in the legislature has to adhere by the Constitution, whether it be crafting legislation or some other duty. It must adhere by the Constitution. Otherwise, it could be challenged in court and therefore, ruled null and void. So, that really sticks to me as I'm performing my duties within Lansing, and I take that oath of office very seriously. And I'm proud to be in a position to, uphold the Constitution every day within my duties as state representative.
This is really the first time that I've taken the oath of office. It's actually my third time. I took it as an 18-year-old. From my perspective now, an 18-year-old kid.
Right.
18-year-old might disagree with that statement. But, when I joined the military, the U.S. Army, it was a little different there because that oath of office was not only to support the Constitution, but also to defend the Constitution. I took it again. When I got out, I joined the Michigan National Guard. And then, again, that oath of office was not only to support and defend the U.S. Constitution, but then it was to support and defend the Michigan Constitution. And a little different with this one, because it's not necessarily to defend, it is to support the Constitution of the United States and of Michigan. And, as an 18-year-old, I can honestly say, I'll be honest, I didn't understand the importance of it or the gravity of that. 18-year-old that was joining the military. It wasn't something that I looked at probably as seriously as I should have. Then, after serving overseas in the Middle East, I felt a little bit more gravity of the situation, but probably not to the extent that I do now. I think really when it hit me more than anything was when my son-in-law served over in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we worried, you know, and I watched my daughter with a newborn son worry about whether he was going to come home or not. But he took that oath to be done at all costs. And that's probably when it hit me the most, the gravity of that oath and the meaning of it. And so, you know, we certainly, as lawmakers, butt up against that every day in our work. You know, you say it probably doesn't happen often. It seems like it happens more often now than it ever did. You know, the Emergency Powers Act of the governor, and that being ruled unconstitutional by, you know, the 1946 version of it, by the Constitution, and then we enacted legislation or enacted a constitutional amendment to ratify that decision. You know, we butt up against it. We question the governor's authority when it comes to mask mandates, the president's authority when it comes to vaccine mandates. So it's certainly something that we deal with on it feels like on a daily basis anymore in these controversial times. But it's important to have that because that is the voice of the people. That's the Constitution. We're defending the Constitution, and that is the people.
So State Senator Outman, Rick Outman, is the last one to speak. His son, State Representative Pat Outman, was on the left. Our elected officials, as he said, I think eloquently so, battling it out day in and day out. The interesting thing about our Constitution, it's like the owner's manual. You don't have to check like you do with your car. How do I change this fuse? I'm not sure what's going on. It's there. It's there all the time. Why do we care? Why are we here today? Why did the government say all K through 12 colleges and universities who receive federal funding shall have this celebration? Why do we care? Well, a lot of times I'll have students say, I hate politics. I don't care about politics. It's all around us. You can ignore it. Fair enough. Freedom means you can ignore it. Did we have something contentious just happen last year? Oh boy, right? We're still fighting with it now. You can watch the news and know about any night of the week. There's stuff going on out there. The Constitution is right there. Nobody's maybe waving around the document. It's right there. When we disagree, when we have different ideologies, when we have major social issues facing us, how do we get to a solution? The Constitution. Each and every day. Now, I get that politics can be super noisy, and I get that who wants to watch the news because I don't think I can trust them anymore. Okay. How about this issue right now? We have a class full or a room full of younger folks. How hot is this issue right now throughout America? Whether or not young children should be wearing masks in schools. I have a lot of students saying, Todd, it is too noisy. I don't believe in it. It's so noisy. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about it. Because outside of school board hearings about this issue, people are now resorting to fisticuffs. Related to that, I've got to tell you, in my classroom, it's a very common question from my students. Many times they're there because they have to be, but at the same time, they have this broad question about what's happening in our country right now. Politics is just downright nasty. It's ugly. What does this mean, and is it ever going to get better?
Well, it's true. Politics has gotten very divisive in modern times. And, you know, I don't think it'll get better for a number of years, but I'm hopeful it will get better. What the founders failed to anticipate was the rise of political parties. And that's something that took place towards the end of George Washington's tenure as president. And it makes it very hard to come together as a whole and to get some significant systemic changes enacted. And the other key factor, I think, is social media. And that's something I blame for a lot of our society's problems. It can get very divisive on some of those social media platforms, aka Facebook, Twitter, you name it. And politics is no different on those social media platforms as well. And so
it's hard to be graceful on social media.
It really is. Emotions run high. You're venting to a keyboard, basically.
And there's bravery behind a keyboard.
And there's bravery behind a keyboard. And I think if people would take a step back and maybe take a few minutes to reflect on what you're about to post on social media, I think our society would benefit a lot better from that. But I will say that the one thing that the electorate has the ability to do, aka the voters, is to vote in or vote out people in office that don't represent the government the way that they feel is necessary. The power relies on the people, and if they think that their elected official, is not representing them in the fashion that they agree with, then it's up to them to take action and to vote them in or out of office. And that's something that I reflect on daily. My job is to represent my district and to represent it well. And, I reflect on that every single day in my job as state representative.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, the whole structure is premised on one basic notion, right? Consent of the governed. When you read the Declaration, and obviously the Constitution provides a structure to that, but consent of the governed, handing over that power. So exactly right.
Sure, and like I said, Todd, I am very hopeful that it will get less divisive over time. We just need to come together as a country, and that's something that I instill within my voice as state representative.
When you talk about consent of the governed, our Michigan Constitution starts right out with that. Article 1, Section 1 is all political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their equal benefit, security, and protection. And that is the crux of our Constitution. As far as the divisiveness, the ugliness in politics, it's getting worse, but I can remember being asked that by the editorial board of the Greenville Daily News back in earlier elections. They used to endorse a candidate. They don't so much now, but and I can remember I was going through a pretty contentious one, and they asked me about that, what I thought about, for lack of a better term, mudslinging. And I said, "Is that a rhetorical question?" I said, "You know the answer better than I do." I said, "Why do you report on that instead of reporting on somebody getting an A in school or somebody doing something great?" I said, "It's because bad news sells. It's just the way it is." And I said, and I'm not blaming you, you the newspaper. You wouldn't do it unless you got a reward for it. The reward is we buy your papers. We demand that. We want that. And so if we want to change that, we've got to decide to change it at the individual level, and don't blame other people. And it's got to start with us.
Right. Absolutely, no doubt about it. At the end of the day, the structure that the Constitution creates, we the people, it tells you right in the first line, the very first phrase, and even more importantly, this is where we kind of, founding fathers, scabs and warts and problems and issues, no doubt about it. They didn't suggest to us this is perfect. They said, we're going to make it better. And then you're going to make it better. Okay? Tells you right in the front line what our expectations should be. Okay? It's the framework for how this is supposed to work. It's the framework for which we, the people, are actually served by our government. Instead of what we had just kicked to the curb with King George III, which we're going to talk about in a moment. It secures freedom. Most centrally, it establishes a federal structure. We forget this in today's world. But we all think DC, the president. DC, we have a federal system. These elected officials that you just heard from serve us in Lansing. Well, many of us think, oh, it all starts and stops in Washington, D.C. This is a federal structure this Constitution creates. It's critical to understand that is to secure freedom as well. You split power among levels, right? You're going to reduce it at each level. So when students say, is it ever going to get better? Maybe they said the same thing in the 1960s. Not suggesting those weren't legitimate issues, they clearly were. The 1960s are a decade in which Washington, D.C. was a perpetual protest. So if you're younger, you might feel like, holy cow, somebody just beat somebody else up at a school board meeting. It's never been like this. Not the case.
I have a question.
Sure.
So do you think that like people running away from colleges and not really educating themselves on it, do you think that is giving the government more power to oversee?
Right. If it's a government that we the people and by the people, then at the end of the day, if we're just going to ignore it, is it by the people? Is your question?
Yes.
Certainly is a danger. Well, here's our consent because we're not paying attention. So, you know, it's funny when you talk about voting behavior in this country, our numbers tend to be a little bit lower compared to some other democracies in the world, like a congressional race, maybe 35% of the eligible voters turn out. It's actually a couple political scientists who say, but doesn't that suggest people are kind of happy? But your point is very well made, right on target. At the end of the day, if we're just going to walk off, go do something else, right? It's kind of tacit consent, isn't it? Implied consent. Well, come and yell at me a little bit, or talk to me, or go vote, or, right? Very good, very good. Okay, and ultimately, if it feels heavy today, if it feels nasty and ugly, we have a lot of folks who paid the ultimate price, devoted the full measure, right? Very difficult for us to comprehend today, but there were single days of the Civil War in which 25,000 casualties were experienced. 25,000 in a day in a nation of nowhere near what we have now. The theory or the reality. To understand the Constitution, we have to go into history just a little bit. Just a little bit. History is all about, you have to learn it, I know, memorizing dates can get really tiresome, but at the end of the day, you got to know where you were so you know where you are and where you're going. It's really that simple. So how did we end up with the Constitution? We got to back up just a little bit. Now, as my students in this room will recognize, we've been spending now 4 weeks kind of sort of on that history. Can't do that today. We got just a few moments, right? Go right here. The Declaration of Independence. So in a very simple way, the Declaration describes why we created the United States of America, and the Constitution describes how. Okay? These are the reasons we're going to kick King George to the curb, and then sometime later we decide finally this is what we're actually going to do about those reasons. Why? Okay? So you got to go to the Declaration. You ever wonder, well, what is this country really all about? You go to the Declaration. How do we get to the Declaration? How do we finally decide I'm going to kick King George to the curb, right? Collectively. We want way quickly past this stuff. The thing a lot of folks forget is, or don't know, is 1776, Declaration of Independence. We kind of have that date, hopefully a little bit sort of figured out. The American colonies were established starting early in the 1600s. Do the math very quickly. You're talking about 140 years. It's essentially, king's over there, we're over here, let's figure out how to get this done. The colonies established their own legislatures, their own quasi-judicial systems, their own trade partners and routes. They're doing their own thing because King George is over there, leaving us alone. They start to develop American ideals, like equality, individualism, the American dream itself, right? We're doing our own thing. Well, the king has to fight with France. Great Britain and France are historic enemies, arch nemesis of one another, right? So they decide to argue about the borders in North America, called the French and Indian War. Okay? At the conclusion of this war, between Great Britain and France, we're colonies of Great Britain, so we're obviously on that side. They sign a treaty in 1763. Okay, we're all good to go. We have two universal truths about war in the history of this world. What are they? One, we lose lives. A lot of people die. There's a lot of casualties. Anybody know what the other reality of war is? Universally true. No, my students can't answer this. Okay, my students can answer this. Tons of money. You got to invest. You're going to spend some coin. They're going to be costly. It doesn't take the king and the parliament to figure out, oh man, we just spent a ton of money on the American landscape. Oh, I know where we can get it, from those pesky colonies. So they started out with something not quite as big called the Sugar Act, but the big one, the Stamp Act. 1765. 2 years after, we just helped King George kick the French off the continent. Thanks a lot, buddy. Thanks. I mean, we know this in America today. Even if you ignore politics, if I raise your taxes, right, everybody's going to get really excited. Always been true. So the chatter starts. Declaration, declaration, declaration. Can't believe he's starting to push us around now, and now he's trying to take our money. Okay? Now, those of you who had civics know there's other events, the Boston Massacre, et cetera, but we have to, for purposes of data, kind of fast forward. Just know the Stamp Act was the spear, the nasty hot poker, taxation. Okay? Enough on the American landscape, not all, but enough are convinced it's time for us to break free from this nonsense. And they do so. Declaration of Independence. I'm not even going to try, right? Just listen up. Well, when you say, hey, I don't like that, right? King, go, and we somehow win that war. General Washington, still today, military strategists are like, still don't get it, don't quite understand it, but nonetheless, a distant war fighting against a guerrilla force, which is what we were. We can kind of see that as a recurrent theme in our history, right? How difficult such a war can be. We got to form a government. Do we form the Constitution? We just kicked a tyrant to the curb. We started out with something that failed called the Articles of Confederation. We are so worried about tyranny, this all-powerful central government, the king, that we take that pendulum and swing it all the way over to the other side. Leave almost all, power in the states. No real central national government. No taxing power. No militaries, please. How about nothing much of anything? No president. Yes, we had a Congress. And they were so concerned about that tyranny coming back somehow that they decided to say to change these articles, all 13 colonies have to agree. Okay, this is bigger than 13, but how about we order a pizza and decide what to put on it? Is that going to happen? No, it right off the bat isn't working. All 13 have their own thing going. They start to see each other as rivals. Hey, your Virginia tobacco gets taxed here in New York, right? And so on and so forth. I'm New York. I care about New York, not this union. Okay. Flounders for a few years, then finally somebody puts together their own little militia because they don't like farm foreclosures anymore. We call that Shays Rebellion. But that's kind of the archetype. That's the lot of rebellions across these counties because nothing's working. They've all printed their own money by the stacks. Inflation's through the roof. Nothing's working. So once these foreclosures started hitting farmers hard, they decided to arm themselves, not with pitchforks, but with firearms, and say, no, Judge, sorry, you're not going to foreclose on us. Go back real quick in your mind. Why do we form governments in the first place? Do we form governments so the person with the biggest stick wins? No, you can scream freedom all you want. The person with the biggest stick is not supposed to win. It's supposed to be a system, a structure. And from the get-go, we immediately recognize, wait, this is just like having a king around. You tell me I'm a banker, I'm not going to get my money back because somebody had a gun? Well, it's no different than throwing somebody in jail for some made-up crime. You're just, man or woman with the biggest stick should not be the winner. That's a state of nature. It's why we form governments in the first place. So we're not in a state of nature. Okay? Call goes out. Once those foreclosures start getting messed with, I'll let you draw your own conclusions about that. Gentlemen, please send delegates to Philadelphia. So each state is going to send delegates to Philadelphia to amend the Articles of Confederation. One gentleman in particular, the father of the Constitution, the architect of the Constitution, James Madison, oh boy, can't wait till we all get in town. He's the first to arrive. He's got a grand scheme or plan, depending on your view of the world. We're not going to amend anything. I know how to do this. Nothing's perfect, but we still have it today, largely because of James Madison. A lot of folks coming to town finally arrive, and I'm sure they're going out and drinking mead and all that, hanging out. Madison's up in his room, developing this plan day after day. And then he finally comes out with what we call that, you may have heard it, the Virginia plan. That's where he's from. This new federal structure, separation of powers. The whole point to that kind of 9-box matrix, protect individual freedom. Because Daniel Shea and his regulators with guns is not protecting individual freedom. Catches everybody flat-footed, the small states especially, because his plan favored the large states. Congress shall be made up of representation by state population. Okay? New Jersey, one of the small states, finally gets it all together. They decide, hey, here's our plan. It looks largely like the Articles. All states will be equal. That's the big fight throughout the summer. What we end up with after that fight during that summer, on September 17th, the final document that's sent to the states for ratification. States had to approve it. 7 articles in total. The 3 big branches of government are 1, 2, and 3. And most importantly, the last one, the 7th, directs that once 9 of the 13 states approve, we're good to go. I hope you see the quirk there. Wait, 13 to change the articles and only 9. Wait, what? Believe it or not, Virginia, Madison's home state, was not in the front 9. They came on, oh, well, it's done. Let's come on afterwards now. Yeah. This was because of the fight for the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was not on the Constitution as it came out of Philadelphia. James Madison listened clearly. Among the most important points I'm going to make all day, strongly opposed the idea of a Bill of Rights. The architect himself, that is the worst possible idea. Court We understand that. Most of this came out of his mind, and he said, man, when you write it down, you're going to cancel everything else for it. When we come out of that state of nature and we hold hands to form a government, Madison, Jefferson, Washington, all of them would have said, you have natural rights that run throughout. They're infinite. You can't define them. Madison, and we've heard this today, right, in our public square today, said, if you write it down, that's all they're ever going to have. People will start to restrict everything else. And you hear this, right, in our families, in our communities, in the public square. Well, that's nowhere in the Constitution. Madison would say, exactly right. That doesn't mean you don't have it. So some of these amendments we're comfortable with, and these are protections from the tyrant. Madison finally relented. He saw he was going to lose. We would end up with no Constitution unless he agreed, I will personally write the Bill of Rights in the first conference. And he did. States agreed to ratify. That's remarkable. We don't do that in politics anymore. Number one, compromise. And number two, okay, we trust you'll do that. We'll go ahead and do this first. We don't do that anymore. So the First Amendment, right? We're comfortable with this kind of stuff, right? Speech, religion, press, right? Fourth Amendment, searches and seizures. The Second Amendment, right to keep and bear arms, and so on and so forth. Critically, not part of the original Constitution, and as written, not meant at all to interfere with the power of the states. Congress shall make no law. The Supreme Court created that over time. They would pull, they called Selective Incorporation, they would pull one of the 10 in the Bill of Rights across, say, well, now this applies to state level activity. And that didn't really start happening until the 20th century. Right to keep and bear arms. Very important, right? Especially in this community. Yep, I agree. At the end of the day, that wasn't affirmed by the Supreme Court against state restrictions until 2008. You could have stood on the street corner in 2007 and said, Michigan has no right to interfere with my Second Amendment rights, and you'd be folded. Not until 2008. So this was a process the court used. Those rights were written by individuals fearful of a strong central government, not the states. And we know throughout history the states have been problematic in recognizing individual freedoms, rights, etc. Right? Once Madison relents, we get 9 states to come on board, and then more later. And before you know it, ipso facto, we end up in 2021 arguing between each other about whether or not masks, vaccines, and a whole host of other things are constitutional or unconstitutional. Here's the good news. Here's what Abraham Lincoln would say. Let's go to somebody who clearly was in the center of the darkest period in American history. Nobody wants to argue with that, right? The Civil War. He was very fine. He was a very eloquent orator. He could literally stand up and speak for 5 hours at a time without pause. He would constantly write notes to himself. It's probably why he became so brilliant, so eloquent. His letters, people, was incredible. He referred to the Declaration, and one central aspect of the Declaration in particular: liberty, freedom for all. He's stressing all. Civil War, think about that for a moment. He said that here in America is our apple of gold. The Constitution is the frame of silver all around it. The structure to protect that central idea to Lincoln and many others, that central idea about why we bothered in the first place. And remember, this is not a small sacrifice at the time. We take it for granted. Yeah, let's take on the most powerful military on the planet. Great idea, you guys. Farmers and whatnot. This is awesome. These ideas weren't just words to them. We might feel that about politics now, that we're just being manipulated and people are full of it and blah, blah, blah. I totally understand that. But at the end of the day, what Lincoln reminds us at a time when we are in our darkest hour, and those types of numbers are occurring at each battle, and it's very unclear what the outcome is going to be. Look to the Declaration. It tells you what the central purpose of this whole thing is, and then appreciate that it is well protected with this frame of silver. So when students ask me, are we ever going to get out of this? Maybe I'm a little bit unusual. I say, they came up with the best possible way for us to get out of the darkness now. This structure, as imperfect as it is, just like they said right at the front, as imperfect as it is, we tend to, in this country, have darkness, we shake our heads, and come back into the light. So I say, it provides the pathway. I believe it. I trust it. So anytime you just feel, oh, word, understand, that structure is there. That frame of silver is there. Questions? Even technology putting that aside. Questions? Do I have any, Kevin, on my screen up here? Anybody feel at the end of the day, some of what I just described, I'm just going to ignore this because I don't like people screaming at each other? Does it feel like it's a permanent feature at this point? To solve this at least? To any of us, I tell my students, they've heard it many times, I don't care what you think, I care how you think, right? So trust me, E or R, left or right, I'm good with all of it. It's all good. Does anybody actually buy it in this room that if you're an R, the D's are truly evil, or if you're a D, the R's are actually evil? We see that word come quite easily out of individual, wow, it's just a different way of viewing the world. And maybe I don't like position taking or some positions. So I get it, how it can be. Yes, Mr. Roberts.
I often hear people on Jews or speeches, and they talk about, some people talk about the Constitution being a document that we have to figure out what the frame of the little is. Other people say it's a living document that's meant to change. Where is the Constitution?
Which of my students wants to answer this game? Yeah, so many of our debates and disagreements in the public square really do come, that's a great question because it does kind of come down to the middle of the road where it all starts. And you will see how excited people get about, oh, a new Supreme Court justice, and who's going to be appointing them, and who's going to, and are they conservative or are they liberal? Well, when we put that in legal terms, what we typically say is, are they an originalist, conservative, or are they a pragmatist, liberal? And Rob described it well. It's the battle over, do we go back to James Madison and the rest of them, try to figure out what they were talking about, or do we stay in 2021 and say, well, what might these words mean to us today? So it drives a lot of policy debates because even though Alexander Hamilton at the time called the Supreme Court the least dangerous branch, it's anything but now. We know now this is where the action is, right? So it's often these kind of Mars and Venus. Do I let James Madison tell me what he meant? Or do I take his words and try to figure out how to apply them today? Now, it's never quite that black and white. Even an originalist will say, well, you actually need their understanding of this word in their context and then apply it to today. And folks typically don't just say, well, rewrite everything whenever it's convenient and forget everything, right? It's often conveyed that way. That's just no. But it's really, where does the pressure of this language come from? How much deference do we give to the original authors, so to speak? And I might add, even if you pass a law, let's say in 2000, the originalist says, go to those lawmakers in 2000. Look at their stuff. Look at the legislative history, their letters, their public statements, trying to get, what did they think they were talking about? So the originalist always wants to find the legislator, the person writing a law or a rule or something. Okay, what do we think they understood the meaning to be? And then let's try to apply that to today's context. You see this most often today in the context of the Second Amendment. Right? That debate, that kind of Mars and Venus debate. Great question. Any others? Ooh, yes.
Well, it's not people that we should get a comment.
Is that true?
I saw a comment.
Any other comments, questions, or concerns? Who?
Maybe a show of, maybe you're comfortable. Who feels comfortable, if not positive, about the future when it comes to our politics? I know you might feel really positive about something else, but when it comes to, all right, Todd wants to take you to Lansing or Washington, D.C. Show of hands if you feel actually on the good side of 50%. And I want, okay. Now I'm going to know who's not raising a hand at all. You're on the negative side, raise your hand. The negative side of 50 when it comes to our politics. Can't be on the 50. Can't be on the 50-yard line. What did Senator Outman say a lot of this has to do with? Anybody remember? Modern. Usually a function of age cohort a little bit, how old we are in our view of social media, but do people agree with that at all? That social media can be a focusing problem? How we interact with one another?
You get too many people that are, like you said, keyboard tough guys. They speak their mind on the keyboard, and then that's not something they would necessarily say to somebody's face, you know? I mean, that's the biggest thing is they do have to sit back and take a breath. And would I say this to a person would I say this to this person? Yeah, in person.
Yes.
To go along with that, social media also allows people to share a lot of misinformation and to manipulate people's words to coerce towards a certain viewpoint. And people don't tend to go past that and fact check. So it makes it an issue in that it's spreading around a lot of misinformation.
And is it easy to fact check now?
You've
At
got a lot of,
812 channels,
right, you've got a
so
lot of
to speak.
sources.
right?
It's always good to go to each side because everyone has natural bias, right? So
We do.
we want to look at each piece and then conclude from those pieces our own.
Yeah, very good, very good. To this point, is there a feature in our Constitution itself which talks about this face-to-face, how important face-to-face is when I have the right to face my accusers, criminal trials? You can't just say, well, Susie said somewhere out there, you did the bank robbery. No, when I bring Susie in here, there's something about this dynamic where, not hard, go ahead and give me straight. You're not going to, it's just kind of hard, right? But boy, if I'm just, Jonesy or whatever, it's easy, man. I'll fire this bar. Who cares about that? No doubt about it. I think I saw another hand. Yes? She's not.
Like, people in places that would gild information that is either irrelevant, unimportant, or just misinformed. And when asked where or why they think that, they just get angry because you don't agree with them.
Yeah, there's a lot of psychology involved in politics, and it didn't used to be as much psychology versus reason and logic. It's a lot of psychology now. Simple reality is we're all human beings, and we all believe what we believe. Even if we think we don't believe anything, we believe something, and we have a confirmation bias. So if I have 800 sources of like whether or not masks reduce coronavirus, did everybody just get a little political? Isn't that interesting, right? How about vaccines? Everybody goes, uh-oh, I see your backs coming up. It's just anyway, if I want to actually research that, well, I can go find what I already believe. And then have a citation and look at me, and I knew I was right all along. It's just a reality of human nature. It's an unfortunate reality at times, but there's no way for us to get around it. I try to do what you do. I tell my students, well, Sirius radio at XM, driving back and forth, it's kind of when I get all my news. I listen to CNN in one direction and Fox News in the other. NPR once in a while. Lunch hour. I don't know. I'm trying to get everything and figure out what's going on. I know